Welcome to another podcast episode. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome. Got a good episode today. What we are talking about is something that we get a lot when we do workshops at universities, or like if we get on a call with someone and we ask them the question like, do you have any questions? And they oftentimes will just say like, I don't even know where to start. So today, that's what we're going to be talking about is financial planning for beginners. Specifically, we're going to be talking about 5 steps. If you're watching on YouTube, you're going to be able to see some of the stuff that we're going to walk you through and how to do this. If you're listening on the podcast, well, take some notes if you're a beginner. And even if you're not a beginner, some of these hints and tips are going to be applicable to you as well. So with that, let's jump right into the episode. Before we do so, though, I want to just make sure that if you are listening on the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, like it, subscribe to it. Same thing with YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, comment, like, share. That way we help get the word out to everybody. It helps us grow. It helps them learn. And it's much appreciated. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let me do this. I am going to pull up a profile here, so that way I can give you kind of a background on the situation. Let's just say this is a new grad. They're making some income, probably about $78,000 a year. They got some debt, and they got some goals, maybe trying to buy a house or whatever it may be. All that stuff we're going to be talking about. And we're going to be talking about like where do you even start at it. So if you're watching on YouTube, and if you do have your FitBucks profile, you can actually try to follow along. This is our current platform right now. We are going to be rolling out a new version of this here probably in the next 2 months. So if you're watching this, it might look a lot different, but it's still the same overall strategy. There's 5 steps. Okay, so step number 1 is what we call our first formula, which is just income minus expenses equals remaining cash, aka it's your budget. Okay, that's the logical starting point, and it's real simple. You just put in your gross income, and then you put in your day-to-day debt. Now, this is a few keys I want to put on here. A lot of times when people do their budget, they just come up with this huge laundry list of stuff, of everything, right? But the key and the trick that I found of keeping this stuff simple is just put your day-to-day expenses. So things like your 401k contributions, your debt payments, your insurances, those are all going to be coming later in step number 2. What this is just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to put my day-to-day expenses in there, like groceries and like phone bills and that type of stuff. And one of the key things that you'll want to do is begin looking at these percentages of where is my money going. Okay, so that's step 1. And another key point on this, a lot of people get stuck in building a financial plan on this budget. And to me, it's like it's important, but where we get to in step 2, that's where it's going to be largely important. Okay, that's like the most important piece we go to. So let's go into step number 2. Step number 2 is where we look at what part of our money goes to assets and debt. So it's assets minus debt equals net worth. That's the second formula that we use at FitBucks. Okay. So from there, what you want to do is just say, hey, I have some loans. So let's just say a certain percentage is going to my loan. So let's just say I'm going to do 30% towards my loans. And then I'm going to do 3% towards my 401k on my assets and 3% towards my Roth IRA. Again, this podcast is not talking like going to be discussing 401ks and IRAs and all that stuff. That's another video, another podcast for down the road. But right now, let's just say that is how much money I want to go to debt and financial assets. Okay. The reason why that's so key to financial planning is these percentages. You can start to see what the big things are. Where's most of my money going? And so like I like step 2 the most, because if you've ever heard this saying like pay yourself first, That's what step 2 does. It's what is going towards my financial assets for investments. What is paying off my debt the fastest? It's paying yourself first instead of worrying about your day-to-day expenses and paying the grocery store and paying Netflix and paying this and paying that. It's I'm going to build assets or pay off debt. Fantastic. That's essentially paying myself, because assets minus debt equals net worth, and net worth is what I'm trying to decrease. Or increase, I'm sorry. Net worth is what I'm trying to increase. So I do that by either building assets or paying off debt. I'm paying myself first. Okay. So that is the key to step 2, is those percentages. And if you're looking at those percentages while you're building your plan, it allows you to alleviate a lot of gray hairs. A lot of times I see people, they get stuck on step 1 and they're like, I got to get this $20 expense in there, and it's like 0.001% of their budget. It's like, who cares? Let's go focus on something that's a bigger percentage of your income, so that way we can see what actually matters, and that you can worry about that instead of worrying about the small things that, again, don't really matter. Okay. Now, step number 3 is what's going to risk management. Percentages. Risk management, for those of you guys that don't know what that is, it's basically insurances. Okay, so when we think of this for financial planning for beginners, that first formula we told you about in step 1, income minus expenses equals remaining cash, that formula happens every single day. Boom, 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 boom. The second step for financial planning for beginners, and the second formula is assets minus debt equals net worth. You can't just say, hey, you know what, my goal is to have $1 million in my 401k, and that's going to be there tomorrow. It doesn't happen like that. It happens over time. Same thing with debt repayment. It happens over time. Okay, so step 1 happens every day. Step 2 happens over time. Well, what happens if something happens to you? For example, you become disabled and you no longer have that time to do the second formula. That's where risk management comes in. It helps bridge the gap between step 1, today, and step 2, which is tomorrow. So things like health insurance, dental insurance, disability insurance, life insurance, that's where we put this in, is in step number 3. And again, we do it as a percentage of our income to say, hey, where is my money actually going? Okay, so that's step number 3. Step number 4 and 5. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that, these steps up here don't coordinate with what I'm talking about right now. It's because we are changing this in our new interface. So in a few months from now, when you go on to this screen on fitbucks.com, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will coordinate with everything that I'm talking about right, in this video and on this podcast. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out for those of you that are actually watching this. That's why the steps don't exactly align. They will coming up soon. But step number 4 is actually down here. If you're watching on YouTube, it's life events. Okay, so what you want to then do is to say, okay, I do step number 1 and I do step number 2. I add in life events. So things like, do I want to buy a house? Am I getting married? Am I having children? These things are vitally important because it can drastically change your financial plan in the future, but not only in the future, but today. And I'll give you an example of this that we see a lot of times. For those of you that don't know, our first technology was centered around student loans. So we've helped new grads with over $1.6 billion in student loans. Okay. And a lot of times people will be like, well, I'm going to go on an income-driven repayment plan. And they knew that they were getting married, but they didn't factor that into their financial plan. And so once they were married, it really messed up their monthly payments on those loans, and then they had to switch into a different type of repayment strategy. And so it really puts them behind the 8 ball because, they've accrued a lot of interest and now it's going to cost them. Whereas a simple plan, if they would have sat down and said, hey, I'm a beginner, I need to develop a financial plan, I know this life event's coming up, how does it affect me today? They could have gone back to step number 1 and step number 2 and repositioned themselves to be in a better situation in the future once they were married. So it's very important to know those life events. Again, just some different things like getting married, buying a car, inheritance, mortgages, Those are the types of things that we're looking at, things that can drastically change your financial plan. Not only is it good to know today, but also into the future, because when those things happen, then that's when you need to go into step number 1 and step number 2 again and say, hey, I had these major life events. Do I need to change any of these percentages? And that's how you build your financial plan, and then that's how you track it, okay? So that's step number 4, is adding in life events that you see coming up in the near future. The last step is setting your first goal. Now, some of you might already have this goal done, but even if you do, it still helps to make sure that you understand where everything's coming from. And that's up here, if you're watching this, that's your emergency fund, okay? In FitBUCks, we default to 3 months, basically just your expenses. So we look at your expenses in step 1, and then we look at your debt payments, your minimum payments in step number 2. And then we say, hey, you need to be able to cover those for 3 months. That's how much you need in a savings account or a checking account. Okay, so for example, if you're following along online, if you're following along on podcasts, this is the numbers that come out for the plan that I'm doing right now. The monthly expenses come out to about $2,737. So at a minimum of 3 months, that's about $8,211. That's how much I would need in a checking or a savings account to have an emergency fund. So if I don't already have that, I know that's my number 1 goal. Like, that's what I'm trying to do, is get that money in that account. If I already do have that, then I know, hey, I need to maintain that amount. And if I ever drop below, I need to increase what I'm doing. But that's also why step 1 and step 2 are so important, because step 1 and 2, those expenses and your debt payments and stuff are going to change over time. So your emergency fund should change too. Now, you most of the time have to calculate that by hand. If you are signing up for our new tracking solution, then once you implement your financial plan, we update that emergency fund and we'll tell you what exactly it's going to be, okay? But those are the 5 steps of financial planning. And then when you're saying, hey, how do I compare these plans? You have to compare the short-term effects of what you're planning on doing and also the long-term effects. Because some of you, for example, might want to, pay off your loans very quickly, but your number 1 goal is buying a house. So if you're trying to pay off your student loans quickly, you're not going to be able to buy a house because you can't afford it. You're paying off your loans. All your money's going towards that. So you might want to go on an income-driven repayment plan, right? So that's how you can compare, hey, can I accomplish my short-term goals, and then what's the repercussion long-term? And you just compare those side by side. Now, I know it's hard to run simulations. You don't have to use FitBUCks' technology, but I highly emphasize it. That's why we built it. Is so that way when you go to compare those financial plans, it's very easy to do. We run the simulations for you, and it's very easy to see. But those are the 5 steps to financial planning for beginners, okay? 1 is to make sure that you put in your income minus expenses. That's the first formula, which is your budget. And again, it's your day-to-day expenses. Step number 2, how much of your money is going to assets or debt as a percentage of your income. Step number 3 is how much is going towards risk management, which is insurance. Again, as a percentage of your income, how much is going to that. Step number 4 is putting in your life events. Okay, both for today to see if you need to change something in your plan, but also in the future so you know, hey, at this point in time, I need to go in and change something in my financial plan. Then step number 5 is making sure that you know what your emergency fund is. Again, that's part of risk management too, but it's a different type. It's not insurance. It's just making sure you got enough cash in the bank. So with that being said, that is the 5 steps for financial planning for beginners. If you have any questions or you want to walk through this stuff, just build your profile on fitbucks.com, schedule a call with your FitBUCks coach. If you want to go through it by yourself, you can do it by yourself too, or you can just schedule a call with us. We are standing by. We'll talk to you soon.